Introduction to Meditation, Session 8, March 9th, 2017, being held at Dalhousie University, Room B, 400. Today's topic is chaos and reorganization. We've covered 7 different topics up to this session, and the topics have had a general theme. One theme that you could pull from the 7 previous sessions deals with the power of observation, the power of just being aware, being conscious. Another theme that came out of the previous 7 sessions was that there's a natural tendency that whenever we put our attention on anything, that there is a relationship formed, a feedback between whatever you're observing and yourself. This feedback is very powerful and has been documented in many different ways and called many different things. But the bottom line is that when you are consciously attending to something, change happens. Another guiding principle, I think, that we can draw from the previous sessions is that the overwhelming tendency is that conscious change leads to constructive, positive change, that we always want to improve. And that's what we'll be going into in more detail today. The process of change has 2 parts. There's a chaotic part, and then there is a restructuring or reorganization part. We'll cover 3 areas dealing with chaos and reorganization. The first we'll touch on is something called threshold, when you know that there's a change point coming or a turning point. We'll talk about chaos itself, and there is a rather interesting dilemma about the universe, and this has been debated quite vigorously for many, many decades by the scientific and philosophical community. And it's very important to have a peek at this because it's an underlying principle of all change. And then finally, we'll look at the reorganization process itself. And here the ancients have some guiding information for us, and we'll go into that. But first, we'll do our guided meditation, and we're going to continue with the Qigong shadow exercise. We're going to stay at level 1 with just the arms, and our feet will be in position 1. And I still want you to keep working on finding the bowling spring, that magical point on the center of your foot that all of your weight falls into. Again, we'll stay with the qualities that make these movements Qigong, which is the soft, soft nature of them, very, very gentle and very slow, very accurate, and with your full attention. I recently heard one description of Qigong that I thought is very appropriate. The author referred to doing the Qigong movements with your mind. Move your body with your mind. One thing I want to point out before we do the actual Qigong movements is the whole idea that the body can be divided into these 3 planes. And I want to bring this up again today because each of the arm movements are in relationship to these 3 planes. The hands and arms will be moving at right angles to each of those planes. one at a time. And if you take a look at the graph on the screen, you'll notice that the planes intersect each other at right angles. And two of the planes run parallel to the spine, and one plane runs at a right angle to the spine. Okay, so very important. These are your balance points. These are also where the power points are aligned to. You think of building a deck on your house. You want the supporting members to be aligned correctly with the ground and with whatever the size of the deck is and the angle. Okay, so we'll be doing our movements, and just keep in the back of your mind that there are these three planes, and each arm movement reflects movement along one of those planes. So when I took a look at the definition of chaos, I came up with some interesting things. One definition refers to chaos as being obsolete, or a chasm, or an abyss, something that is maybe perhaps discarded. The second one I found interesting. It refers to a state of things in which chance is supreme. There's an element of chance, or of the probability of not knowing what the result will be. And it goes on in that second description of chaos to talk about an inherent unpredictability in the behavior. And then the third one talks about utter confusion. I think all three have some meaning for me. When you're going into chaos, something has become obsolete. Something is no longer working, and you have to discard it. And during that process of discarding, there is this unknown component to it. You don't know what you're going to receive. When you discard the old you and you get a new you really don't know all the components of that. So there is some chance or unpredictability about it. And yes, it is confusing, and utterly confusing. So I'd like to equate being conscious with being awake. I haven't discussed it very much, but there is something in the literature that you can research on your own called the awakening. We each have to awake. And if you think back to your early childhood, there was a point when you became aware of you. Can you remember that, when there was a point when all of a sudden you became aware? You had an awakening. And you may have had different times in your past where you experienced some kind of awakening. So it's not a single state, but it's an ongoing process. We keep awakening or expanding our awareness. Now, the subconscious reacts to the conscious mind. And last week I referred to the fact that I see the conscious mind as being the eyes and ears of the subconscious. It guides the subconscious. So whatever you consciously focus on, the subconscious reads that as being important and will begin to process that information. So attention, being awake, focuses the subconscious on that. And there is the key, that if you focus on something, you will begin to process it in a very deep level. And the longer you focus on it, the deeper it will penetrate. We also looked at conscious change and all of the things that were positive and consistent and persistent about change that is done in a conscious way. I use the term self-evident, and it is really quite amazing when you enter into a conscious change process that the solutions are really quite clear. I mean, it's the taking the next step shouldn't be a confusing decision. What will be an issue is making the decision. I think you might be able to relate to that. You know there's a change you have to make, and you know what you have to do, but it's making the decision to do it. That's what causes the issue. And of course, we talked about the fact that change, when it's conducted in this manner, has a self-adjusting feature to it, just like the mobile I referred to. I also indicated that it's okay for change of this nature to be very, very much focused on you. And some people may have a problem with that, may feel they're being selfish or self-centered. Well, sometimes you do have to really focus in on being the best that you can be. And even if you feel totally alone, you can always, always love and care about yourself. So it's very important to care about yourself, to be focused on yourself. And yes, of course, focus on others and help others and do all those great things. But I honestly believe that I can only help someone to the best of my ability. So if I am not centered and living as full as I can, then I won't be able to help someone else do that. So you can only help people as much as you are capable of. So strengthening your center core is important before you reach out and help someone, if possible. So there's something called the threshold, and the threshold is present normally before change. Sometimes change happens so rapidly that you don't have a chance to perceive the threshold, but I'm talking about something that you approach, and it may take you years to come back to this doorway. I know for myself, there were many times I came to a threshold to make a decision to go through it and backed away. Why would someone turn around and turn their back on the threshold of change? Well, I think it falls under the realm or under the concept of resisting. If you are resisting change, you'll avoid it. And there's a number of ways that we can avoid the threshold feeling, because it's uncomfortable. You feel tense. You know something's going to happen. You don't know what it is. And it creates this sense of resistance. And the more you resist, the stronger this anxiety or pressure builds. And there are a number of ways that we can avoid it. We can just distract ourselves. You may have someone that you have a relationship with that when you approach an uncomfortable topic, they change the topic. They avoid discussing it. There's always something else to do, or this isn't the right time to talk about it, etc., etc. So we can avoid confronting and facing the threshold. There's another thing that we do that falls under avoidance, is we can just plain right out ignore it. So there's a threshold there, and if we just whistle in the dark and turn our back, we can walk away from it and pretend it's not there. But the threshold never goes away. It's always there. The third thing we can do, and I find this one extremely interesting, we can hallucinate. We can approach the threshold, and in our mind, we can hallucinate that everything is fine and that we've done it. I know when I've needed to make some lifestyle changes or do anything of that nature, I can sometimes convince myself that I don't need to do it. Everything's fine. So, the best term to describe this is hallucination. We hallucinate, we fabricate a reality that removes the threshold or the issue. So recognizing when you're at a threshold is very important, Because the one thing that will be common whenever you hit a threshold is that you will not be okay. You'll stop being okay, and you can just hopefully check yourself regularly during the day. Do I feel okay? Yep, I do, and go on about your way. But if you don't, there's something there that you're perceiving that you are resisting. Now, if it's a major threshold, a major change, recognizing that gives you the opportunity to just pause and maybe contemplate about what's going on and maybe pay much closer attention. So at this point, when you are approaching a threshold, this is the time to really focus and pay attention. So you enter the doorway. You do whatever it is you have to do to cross the threshold, and at that moment you enter into chaos because you've abandoned the safe world outside of the threshold. Right? Before you step through, well, you have control. You know what the outcome is going to be, even if the outcome is negative. But you go through the threshold, you make that decision, and chaos ensues. And one of the reasons we have chaos is that we are no longer following the old rules. So prior to this, you had a rule of behavior that you followed. Well, you abandoned. You say, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. And chaos ensues. Now, at this point, I just want to change gears a little bit and flip more into the scientific community, because this is where a great debate took place, and it's centered around the laws of thermodynamics. There's a problem with the laws of thermodynamics, particularly the concept of entropy, the concept that the world or the universe is constantly expanding, or another way of looking at it, entropy explains why everything decays or dissipates. So if you were to open a bottle of perfume in this room, you would smell it very strongly, and then as the perfume wafted away from you and spread through the room, your sense of the smell would decrease, and as others in the room would begin to smell it. Well, eventually all the molecules from that perfume would distribute evenly throughout the room to a point where no one would really notice it, and eventually they'll spread outside the room and just become a single molecule within a gazillion molecules and not be noticed. So there's this tendency of entropy. Here's the issue. Scientists could not explain why, if the universe has this rule of entropy, and it applies to the exchanging of energy in the universe, if energy is always being dissipated, how is it possible for new things to be created? This entropy causes chaos. Things are decaying. Things are falling apart within the universe. Suns are exploding and the universe is constantly expanding. But somehow there is growth. New life springs forward. So this debate went on and on and on, and it could not be resolved until the concept was developed that change is a result of the chaos, that the universe grows and expands and becomes more resourceful specifically because of the chaos. So it's the chaos in nature that causes growth. I always had this little phrase in the back of my mind, is that if everything went great, there'd be no invention. People invent things because something's wrong. They solve problems and come up with innovative ideas. So it's kind of our human nature, and it's also the way of nature, that when something is broken or doesn't work correctly or is in chaos, the universe will self-adjust and become more resourceful to handle that. So the big thing about chaos is not only is it always present in change, but without it, there would be no change. So the chaos is what you respond to during that change process. That's what makes you stronger. It's the chaos that makes you stronger. So I think that understanding that chaos is so important, then the next question comes, why aren't people happy when they're going through chaos? Why aren't people running around shaking everyone's hands, passing out cigars, saying, yippee, I'm going through chaos. It means I've got a great change coming. Well, I think part of the problem is that chaos is not fun. Being in that state where you don't know what the result will be is, quite frightening, to be honest. I mean, we all like to be certain of what's going to happen today and tomorrow. We want certainty. In fact, I think most people resist change. They fight it. They'd rather have the same things happen at the same day, same time, same place. But that's just not the way it is. Everything comes and everything goes, and there's chaos. Learning to recognize the threshold and entering into chaos, the only thing I can suggest there is the basic principle that we practice in meditation, which is to accept and just observe. Disassociate from the chaos. You are not the chaos, you are responding to it. So change is a response to the chaos. So you go through the chaos. You pass through the threshold, you go through the chaos, and something amazing happens. You reorganize. Not only do you reorganize, but you become more resourceful. One of the concepts that I like regarding conscious change is that whenever you go through a threshold and go through the chaos and reorganize, you always restructure to a more resourceful level. You always go up a level. You always, in some way, become more efficient and more structured. The ancients looked at this in a very interesting way. They said that whenever a change takes place, it is always more resourceful than the previous change. That's interesting. Every change that's conducted in this way is always more resourceful. It's more elaborate, more specific. The other thing that was noted about change is that whenever there is a change to a more resourceful level, everything that you knew and everything that you were in the previous level is still intact. So the rules and the associations or the meanings that you had in the previous level still hold true at the more structured advanced level. This is important because some people, and I think I did too, to a large extent, resist change because they're afraid they're going to lose something. They feel that something's going to go away or they won't be themselves. I had one person approach me when I was running the wellness center. It was actually a son with his father, and his father had had several heart attacks. And the son looked very, very concerned and asked me if his dad could come and do some meditation and perhaps some Tai Chi with us. And I said, oh yeah, for sure. The father was a little bit reluctant, and then he looked at me and says, I'll come, but I don't want to change. And I just looked at him, and the son had a ghastly look on his face. What? You'll go and you'll participate, but you won't change. You don't want to change. So it's okay. You're not going to lose anything. You're going to gain. You always gain. The really interesting thing that I noticed whenever I've had a major reorganization, The chaos can seem to go on for a long time. There's no particular formula, whether it lasts a minute or lasts, a week or a year. The chaos will go on as long as it needs to. But when that change happens, it's almost instantaneous. I've heard people describe that they just wake up one morning and they're different. They feel different. They know that they're going to go forward and everything's fine. I had a very good friend who was going through a very rough divorce, and we would meet and have coffees at Tim's occasionally, and all I could do was listen. And she went through some pretty nerve-rattling states. And then one day, I showed up. She walked in, sat down, and she was completely different. She had morphed. She had changed. And her response to me was, "It's amazing. I just woke up this morning and everything was right." I guess the big thing about conscious change and this process is that, yes, it can be difficult, but it's also very rewarding and it's enduring. Once you go through the change, there's no going back. You will be different. And I think I like the word enduring. It will endure. As Albert Einstein, I think he had a very interesting view of the world. And his view of the world was that man created this world through the process of thinking. And we can't change it unless we change our thinking. And I think that's very, very important. If you change the way that you think about your world, it will begin to change. And in order to change your thinking, it involves contemplation, observation, and really relaxation. Relax, enjoy the process, because it will be worth it. Okay, so now we'll do our traditional meditation. And I just want to mention here that this particular traditional meditation can be done with your eyes open. We do it with our eyes closed here in the class because it's just more convenient and you don't want to be staring at me. But when you're at home, you could pick any kind of object just below eye level sight, and it could be a flower, it could be a picture, it could be a dot on the wall, and that could be your fuzzy dot. It doesn't have to be done with your eyes closed. Some schools recommend doing this meditation with your eyes open. One advantage of doing it with your eyes open is that you can see if anything's going around, if the kettle's overboiling or whatever. Okay, so let's do it. And here will be the one thing that I would suggest when you're doing the guided meditation today. I've tried to stress different things. I'd like to come back to posture. Find your posture. Recall back to the Qigong exercise where we had the three planes. So in this case, if you look at the graph of the young lady sitting in the chair, she's balanced, and her sitting posture bones on the chair could represent the third frame, or plane rather, and the two vertical planes. Her shoulders would represent the second plane, and the top of her head and nose would represent the first plane. They're all lined up. The reason I mention these is that these planes are your power points, are your power lines. And so when meditating, you're strengthening all three bodies. So you need to have that lined up. Well, that's the end of this session. Our next session will be on deep breathing, and that will be on March 16th, here in the same room. And this will be our 9th session coming up. In our final session, we'll do a review, and we'll talk about what you can do should you choose to have your own meditation practice. What do you need to do, and what kind of things? So start thinking about that now. If you have a journal, start making notes. So we have 2 more classes left. The next one on deep breathing, and the last one will be on putting together your own personal practice. Again, thank you for watching this video and participating in the class.